So today's topic is lessons from the relationship of Cyavana, Muni, and Sukanya. We hope that you guys all enjoy the session and just mask in and bathe in the consciousness of these wonderful pure devotees. Hare Krishna.
Oh, is it our turn? Okay. Which way you go first?
Krishnandini and I had fun exchanging our realizations on this section of Srimad Bhagavatam about the marriage of Cyavana Muni and Sukanya. And so we hope you've had a chance to listen to our discussion. And we thought, well, we would just open it up to see if anyone have any questions, and then we can go from there.
Yes, and we definitely want you to have questions, because otherwise, what would we say or do? So come on with the questions and comments even for this topic.
So I see that someone's asking you to talk a little bit about the difficulty of the relationship. Now, between Sukanya and her father, because he very easily gave his son in marriage, oh, it must be daughter, to an old man, and was the first person to doubt her chastity when he saw her with a young husband, a young handsome person.
Okay. So again, context of the story a little bit. You all saw the video, so we gave that context, but we hadn't mentioned the part that the devotee is now bringing up, that at some point, Cyavana Muni, Sukanya's father, the king, came back and to visit his daughter and her husband, and he saw his daughter with this handsome, young, vibrant man, and he was really, really disturbed because he thought that she had put aside her old, irritable, not so attractive husband, the sage Cyavana, for this young man. And so he assumed that that's what had happened. But then his daughter, of course, I think Cyavana Muni spoke up and said, well, no, the daughter, that this is my husband. He has just transformed himself. So that's an interesting question, because my understanding of the relationship between Sukanya and her father was a very sweet one, actually. The fact that he would take his daughter hunting just because she asked was a pretty interesting thought. That means that they had sort of a relationship where they were open, and he appreciated her association and her request, the fact that he took her, because one father might say, oh, no, daughter, hunting is for men and you stay home. But I'm just making an assumption that they had a pretty good relationship. And then, again, we talked about having a sense of the culture of the time. And you all remember that the culture of the time was that there was no divorce, especially amongst the higher classes. Divorce was unheard of. And so once you got married, you were committed to that marriage, and everyone expected on all sides for you to stay. So when the dad comes and he sees his daughter with this young man, he's disturbed. And the question could be raised, why would he just jump to that assumption? But again, remembering the culture, his daughter wouldn't be with another man alone in that time. So we don't have a context for that, because, women today, they're with men alone all the time, and it doesn't necessarily indicate something negative or bad. But again, you have to understand the culture. So here he comes upon his daughter, and she's with this young man, and her husband's nowhere to be found. So he does make that assumption. And again, it's the context that we have to look at. It's a lot to learn from these pastimes, and I'm actually very glad that question was asked, because, Prabhupada gave the Bhagavatam as the law books for the next 10,000 years, so I am sure there's so much to be unpacked and understood as we study it more and more deeply, so many layers of understanding. And I think, as Uttama so nicely brought out in the video that we did, that we should always look at these stories to find out what message that the Lord is trying to indicate to us. So there could be some lessons about making assumptions. There can be some lessons about trust. All of these things are there, but also, again, keeping the thing in context. Also, remember that when Sukanya was challenged by her father like that, she didn't get upset with him. She just said, well, oh, Dad, why don't you believe me? And why would you make that assumption? She just explained the truth. We should learn from that. So again, I want to stop there because I'd like Uttama to add a little more to it.
I'm very much agreeing with you that he was just shocked to see that his daughter wouldn't be with her husband. And we can see, though, that he didn't just like huff off and in a fit and, condemn his daughter, but he took the time to listen to her. And he found out that it actually was her husband, etc. So I think it shows that he was actually a pretty loving father. They would take the time to listen and hear her point of view. And I believe it's just what you're saying, that it is an expectation that we try the best in our relationships to make it through the marriage, even when there's difficult times and even when we have a cranky partner. And sometimes we're the cranky partner, so we hope that someone else, our partner, is going to have the commitment and the dedication and the love to bear with us, because we all have our trying times in relationships.
Okay.
Tara, do you want to bring anything else forward?
Hare Krishna, yes. So we have another comment from Facebook. Wow, that's a very difficult relationship to understand in the 21st century. Certainly it's difficult for me to see and appreciate the moral of that story. Looking forward to understand the feminine and illuminated perspective from such wise Vaishnavis. Perhaps you guys can comment on that.
Uttama, did you want to say something? Otherwise, I would say a little something.
I think that comment was before they watched the video. So we definitely hope that you got some understandings from watching our previous video. Go ahead, Krishnandi.
Okay. Prabhupada often said, how would people recognize a devotee? And his response often was, he didn't often say people would ask that question. And Prabhupada's answer was that a devotee would be a perfect gentleman or a perfect gentle lady. And because this is Kali Yuga, because we have so many examples of not gentleman behavior or lady behavior, in fact, it's kind of rare that you see the behavior that would be the kind that Prabhupada wanted us to have. So these stories, these pastimes, they are tips, techniques, indications of how a first-class devotee or a serious devotee or someone who's trying to please God with their life would do in a relationship. And he wanted us to unpack these stories. He wanted us to talk about them. He wanted us to see how they apply to our lives. And he wanted us to get the principles. There are principles in these stories that are eternal, no matter if they did happen thousands of years ago. The principle, for example, of commitment in marriage. The principle, for example, of respect for your elders. These are principles that no matter what time or era we live in, they should be honored, especially if we're endeavoring in the spiritual life. And it's difficult because, this may not be the common behavior in the society. So that's why these stories are very important, and talking about these stories are very important, and see how they relate to us is very important.
I was very much encouraged to see the reciprocation between Cyavana Muni and his wife. Like, even though it seems that at times he had a hard time reciprocating because he was grouchy and in pain, but it didn't go unnoticed to him. Maybe that was kind of his personality, but internally you can see that he did appreciate her behavior. And so at the first opportunity, he tried to make some adjustment. So we got a newer body so it wouldn't be in pain and he wouldn't be so cranky and he could reciprocate. So, just that reciprocation that always needs to be there in relationships, I think is really instructive, because a relationship isn't one-sided, or it's not a relationship.
And also, Uta, very good point, the fact that, you and I have been doing this work for a long time, working with couples and families, and we know that one person in a relationship sometimes can make a difference. Like the one that sort of is committed or has a deeper understanding or deeper vision or deeper view, just their behavior alone can sometimes change the whole dynamics of a relationship. And so, because you're right, because Sukanya did what she should do, then that prompted her husband to really feel compassion for her and wanting her to have happiness in her life and reciprocate. And I think there's a story of Srila Prabhupada's sister, and I know this is kind of extreme, and I hope I'm not opening a can of worms saying it, but Pishima, I think initially she was married to an alcoholic, a drunkard, and he was not a very nice man. And she went to her brother, Srila Prabhupada, and he told her that, just do her service, do her duty. And eventually the husband came around and actually really appreciated Pishima and really reciprocated, So it shows that there is some empowerment in understanding these deeper techniques and tools as a woman. Maybe not all of us can do it, having grown up in this crazy culture, and maybe not all of us need or should do it, depending on the circumstances. But it's good to understand what can empower us to bring out the best in others.
And not to be too impatient.
Yes.
Just like there's that study that couples that are on the brink of divorce, if they carry on, try to get skills, get help, and then you fast forward 10 years later, they're very often happy. So sometimes we're just not patient enough to wait until the, effect of our actions is able to be seen.
Yes, very good point. Very good point. And how many times have we worked with couples that did, get a divorce, and they said, if I knew then what I knew now, I would have worked this out, because, certain lessons that they had to experience, they had to do it over again.
Tara, I think there's a nice question on faith there. Would you like to read that one?
Yes, sure. How do we develop the faith to accept that the way in which our partner treats us is part of our karma which we should tolerate? And how do we know when we should just tolerate and when we should try to address our partner's behavior which we find challenging?
I personally think we should always try to address it. It's just how we address it. Because we might be right, but our delivery might suck. So, I think we have to learn the art of nicely bringing things up at the right time, starting with our worries, starting with our I statements, starting with our difficulties, and seeing if the person's, open to discussing it.
And being ourselves open to getting help. This is why I think it's such a good thing now that we have people who are professionals, who are devotees, who are willing and able to help couples do some work on their relationships. Because oftentimes if you have that person or persons, good, you can have a husband and wife team work with you in your marriage, and give you the tools, help you with the tools that, like Uttama was mentioning, making I statements and reflective listening and hearing each other out, those kind of things. If you have someone that can mediate and help you to express these things. I totally agree with Uttama that we should address them. We shouldn't be glutton for punishment. I mean, I always think about, it took me a while to learn this my own self, but I too am a part and parcel of Krishna. I too have value in the sight of the Lord. So if I let someone abuse me or misuse me, then I'm not really quite taking care of Krishna's person myself. So the important point that Uttama made was, how do you address it? Because we want to address it and be successful or effective. And that's why, we have our book, Heart and Soul Connection, that we recommend that all the devotees get and read and reread and reuse, because it's such a practical tool to help us navigate addressing things in our relationships, examining our own personal biases and that kind of thing.
I also think that we need to have the compassion to be able to address the partner's behavior. Because when a person is not behaving well, it's because they have an unmet need and they're in pain. So it may seem like they're just giving us pain, but that's just their defense mechanism. And somehow or other, they are married to you because Krishna has some hope that you're going to be able to help them grow into the person they should be also.
Very good point. I think it was Bhakti Tirtha Swami, bless his heart, he said that every behavior is either an act of love or a cry for help.
Mm-hmm.
And so when our spouse or ourselves or anyone misbehaves or acts up, if we see it as a cry for help, then that hopefully will evoke that compassion that Uttama Devi just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. So I see that someone is asking there, Tara, about, it's practically irreparable marriage. Are we just supposed to drag it out of duty?
Mm. And when you say irreparable, that is a relative term sometimes. It depends on the circumstances. It depends on the help that you could possibly get. It depends on if you are willing to try something different. We do have a chapter in a book about dealing with serious things in your relationship. And sometimes we'd like to see it as more rare, then you may have to walk away from a relationship or a marriage. If there's physical abuse that the person won't get help from, if sometimes couples separate while they're both working on particular issues in themselves and in the relationship in order to later come back together. So that's a possibility also. In fact, that's something that, more people are trying, and it helps. So I think we'd have to have a little more sense of that word irreparable, but Mother Uttama probably has some more to say on that.
I agree with you. You need a little more clarity, and it's going to be different for different people. Like, I know people who just haven't managed to connect well with their partners. Perhaps it was a bit tumultuous, and now they're at the point where they just kind of leave each other alone. It's not really a relationship, but they're civil to each other. And I see that some people, they choose to stay in those relationships because it's not, you have your whole family context. Your kids are depending on your union to get together, and your other family members. And so sometimes all the rest of the package is enticing enough that, well, this is the way it is, and I just have to accept that. And, we choose to stay in those relationships. And other times, maybe it just really is too difficult. It's eroding our sense of self. And we're just lost all enthusiasm for everything. And I think at those times we really need to take some help from other people and see what all of our options are.
Cool. We have another a nice comment here. Perhaps you guys can comment on it. It says, we live a very consumeristic society in which we learn very easily to buy, discard, and replace items. I feel this consumeristic attitude also creeped into our attitude towards relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Thus, when a relationship is challenging, we leave it.
Yes, disposable marriages. In fact, in the secular community, a lot of people say, well, we'll marry, and then when we no longer meet each other's needs, then we can divorce. I mean, they go into already with that kind of thing. But for us who want to have Grihastha marriages and not Grihamedi marriages, for us who want to offer our marriages as part of our service to Krishna, to Guru, then we owe it to Krishna, to Guru, to ourselves to have vibrant, healthy marriages and to be committed to that. And sometimes we have to get help to make those marriages vibrant and healthy. But the main thing is, if we could, before we get married, get as much help as possible. Get premarital education from serious, trained counselors, therapists, educators. Get blessings from our elders and our family. Do the things before to be proactive so that we can maybe avoid. But even the best that you do, there's always going to be a challenge in any relationship. There's always going to be, we're in the material world, there's always going to be high points and low points. Even in our devotional service, it's like that sometimes. But we don't give up our devotional service because we have the end goal in mind. So once we get married, and hopefully we've had premarital education or some help along the way, and we're committed, then we try to figure out what to do to enrich that commitment. This idea of disposable marriage and throw it away when it doesn't work is just something that is an insect, borrowing Bhaktivinoda Thakur's word, that's eating away at our society and our culture, because the family is the microcosm of the larger community. So when families are dysfunctional and they don't work and they're not healthy, you can just know that that's going to be the whole picture for the whole society. So we have to invest in strengthening our relationships and our marriages and helping one another to do that. And we have an advantage in a way if we're saying that we want to be servants of the Lord, or we want to be devotees. We have an advantage because we already have a commitment to following certain principles, like being truthful and compassionate. So then we just have to figure out how to do that in our relationships and how to help each other do that. But yeah, that's a really good point.
Part of the question was just how to learn to be more dharmic and dutiful and committed. And some of it is values that we have to ourselves imbibe and want to imbibe. So developing the attitude of just in general being more committed, you can see it's your upbringing, part of it. It doesn't mean that if you weren't brought up that way, you can't cultivate it. You know, Srila Prabhupada always emphasized living by our values. So if we want to cultivate being dharmic and dutiful, I think we need to sit down and, make a list of our values that are really important to us in life and, post them somewhere so we can look and we can see, oh, am I living this value? Because really our happiness in life is dependent upon if we are living our values. So I think if we look internally and we see that, oh, I'm not happy, what is it that I'm not doing, that I should be doing? And when we see that, oh, maybe I'm not, spending enough time cultivating my family relationships. Maybe I'm not reaching out and, helping my kids. I'm just, when they're grown up and they need a little bit of help, if I have family values, am I living, the values that I claim to have? We will see that just by using that as a barometer, to check in, am I living and actually spending time on the values that I really appreciate? I think that's one way to, cultivate living by your Dharma. And another way is, good association with people who are living mode of goodness values.
And also, Uttama, having your sadhana pretty sharp.
Yeah, sure.
You're chanting your Hare Krishna every day with attention. You're begging the Lord. You're, offering your food. All these things are protection to help us. I've been married to my husband almost 30 years, and Uttama is almost double that. I've been divorced before, and I could truly say that even in this marriage, I could have said, okay, let's get a divorce. I mean, that somebody wrote an article about us in a book, and they said, by face value, this couple has a lot of reasons not to be together. Speaking of me and my husband, and they were right. But because, as Uttama said, I had to look at my values and how did I want to honor those values in terms of my offering to Krishna and to Prabhupada. And, kind of look at myself, what kind of servant am I to my husband? And not so much deal about what he's doing and not doing. I don't mean like if he was physically abusing me, not deal with that. But I'm saying I started paying a lot more attention to how I was serving in the marriage than what I expected him to do. And that has really, really saved me in the marriage and given me a pretty good relationship with my husband, who's a decent man himself, and he had done similar kind of inventory of himself like that. So here we are almost 30 years later, both of us having been divorced before, but because we made a commitment to honor our values. And then we like each other, we're friends, and there's been days when we didn't like each other as much. But we didn't give up, and so we have some pretty good times and memories because of that.
Hare Krishna. So we have another question from Facebook. So firstly, they thank you so much for being here, for sharing your wisdom. And then they ask, what should the trigger points that we should be aware of between being the person in the relationship that does the deep work and the abuse?
It's a little bit of a vague question, but what I'm understanding is to be able to understand what is abuse or to be able to manage our triggers. I'm not quite sure. I guess we could talk on both or either one.
Yeah, speak on both.
Managing triggers is very interesting, and it's something that needs to be done personally. So when we say triggers, trigger usually refers to a reaction that doesn't equal the present situation. It's being amplified by remembering or even subconsciously being triggered to associate with something negative in the past. And so very often we overreact to something because of a trigger. And triggers, we need to learn how to recognize when we're triggered. One of the ways to recognize, or one of the ways to help yourself evaluate a trigger is to train yourself that when you're overreacting, to try to come to the present and notice something in your body. Like, are your hands sweaty? Is your heart racing? Does my stomach feel in knots? Because that brings you to the present. You know, you're not just somewhere, some trigger from the past that you can't figure out and why you're reacting. And then you can start to, you know, maybe name your emotion. Oh, I'm feeling unloved, or I'm feeling neglected, or I'm feeling like you don't care, or whatever the situation is, left out. Then you can see with this emotion, what could I do to make it better? What's something I could do? You know, could I reach out in some way? Could I ask a question? Could I make a request? It helps you slow it down so that we can actually respond to the present situation. Because it's hard to relate to another person when we're actually relating to something else in the past. We're not really relating to that person. So it makes a very troublesome relationship. And if we have a partner who's very easily triggered, we need to have that conversation on, we are just not going to have a conversation when one of us is triggered. And we're going to take a time out until we can self-soothe and come back and talk about the present situation in a calm way. So I think learning how to deal with triggers is a personal responsibility, and it's something that you have to cultivate as a couple. Do you want to comment on that, Krishnandini?
Yeah, I think this story is pretty relevant. My husband and I went to a smart marriages conference years ago. And my husband went to this workshop and I went to another one. And he came back and he told me a story that really had left a very strong impression on him, and I'm sure everybody else in the workshop. But it was a husband and wife couple that was doing the workshop, and they told the story of how they had been married and they had a tumultuous kind of marriage, and they almost were about to get a divorce. And well, I don't know if they were about to get a divorce, but they were on shaky ground. And he related a story that one day his wife had cooked something and she asked his opinion. And he said, it was okay. She said, okay, was it good? And then she just kept pressing and pressing. He said, well, it could have used a little more salt or something. And then she said, I knew it wasn't good. You should have said that in the first place. And it just escalated in this big argument. And finally the husband said, you know what, I'm going to take a walk. And as he opened the door, she ran and stood in front of the door and said, no, you're not going to take a walk. And she literally held onto his legs and started crying. And he just stopped, and they just stopped. He said, okay, what's going on? This is something bigger than all of that. And they sat down and they talked, and she realized that her father had left the family. And when he walked out the door, she was holding on his legs and said, Daddy, don't go, Daddy, don't go. And he left and never came back. And the husband had a sort of, a mother who was sort of domineering, that always kept pressing. So when his wife kept asking all these questions about how the food tasted, he just wanted to leave. So when they realized that they both had triggered some very deep, painful traumas from the past, they were able to sit down and talk about them and work it out and know how to address it. And that began the healing in their relationship. And I shared that story just because it's just such a obvious one that you can see that we bring a lot of baggage with us from relationships. And sometimes we don't even know why we're responding in the ways that we're responding. And I really love what Uttama said, that we have to take personal responsibility to understand our own triggers and not so much impose on the other person and work with that. And sometimes if you have an honest discussion and talk about things, you can that those triggers will be revealed and acknowledged.
So the other part of the question was, so how do we know that we just need to be the best person that we can be in the relationship and do the most we can? And when is it abuse?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think you talk a little bit about what in one of the chapters in our book we named some red flags, you know, like.
And on our website under resources, we have domestic abuse, and if you click there, there will be quite a big article on symptoms of emotional and physical abuse. So it's really good to read up articles or on what actions constitute abuse.
Because there's emotional abuse, there's financial abuse, there's physical abuse, there's sexual abuse. And if you all really look at all those different categories, the website, VaishnavaResources.org, is a very, very good resource to identify some of those things. And when you identify something as abuse, it's not necessarily that you have to leave if the other person is really willing to get help and get work. Sometimes, again, that separation for a period of time while the help is gotten or the issue is looked at. This is a good time to have a mentor or some person that you trust that you can, consult with and ask, what's the next steps or how do you do it?
Because we certainly don't insist that people stay in abusive relationships.
We do not.
No. So sometimes it's, hard to know when to leave and when to stay. Like maybe there isn't abuse, but it's just like I see in other questions popping up about working towards healing and nourishing ourselves personally so that we can nurture our loved ones. But if it's just not possible and just aren't having a good relationship, isn't it healthier for all concerned to separate? What do you think about that?
Not necessarily, because then I don't know if you've exhausted all of the possibilities. And sometimes we look at our spouse to be the be-all and end-all of all of our needs and wants and desires. And that's why we need all kinds of relationships to be healthy. We need a spouse, we need friends, we need sisters and brothers and uncles and aunts and grandmothers. And everyone contributes to the wholeness of the family structure. And if you're looking at your spouse as the main source of everything, that's not healthy for you or them. Recommend, the Grihastha Vision team started doing couples retreats about, 8 years ago, Utama?
Yeah.
And that's something we hadn't been doing in ISKCON at all, but I think we should do that more and more and more so that couples can exercise in a healthy, non-judgmental, accepting atmosphere some of the options in relationships and learn different techniques and tools and see what other couples go through and be encouraged by the hopefulness that if you can do things differently, maybe you'll have different results in your relationship. I think divorce and all that should be the last resort, especially for someone who's trying to offer their life to God, but sometimes it's unavoidable.
Mm-hmm. Like if couples are just too conflicted and the kids just have to live amidst total chaos and constant fighting, it's not so healthy for the kids. Yeah.
Hare Krishna, can I read the next question?
Sure.
Please.
Cool. So another question from Facebook. She says, in my understanding, there are two sacred things in a marriage worth working for. Number one, vows taken in front of the fire sacrifice. And number two, to enter a relationship when we can deliver our dependence. It would therefore be a worthy goal to work toward healing and nourishing ourselves personally so that we can nurture our loved ones. If this is not possible, would parting ways be a healthier option for all concerned?
I think we talked about that a little bit in our previous answer, but again, I would take consultation with a caring, spiritually involved professional and make sure that you have indeed exhausted all possible channels to improve, because once, we made that vow, then that's a pretty serious thing. Our word should become our bond. And I think an important thing for us to remember, Tara, and all of us, is that Krishna actually set up the institution of marriage for civilized human beings. God did that. And so because he has set it up, he has established a structure for healthy growth and development, that when we make a sincere effort to follow that structure, it's not that we're not going to get help to do that in terms of spiritual strength, in terms of guidance, if that's our desire. Because this is Krishna's will, and he knows that what it takes to have a healthy society, a healthy growing society. So, keep bearing those things in mind and exhausting all possibilities and getting help from others, I think, is very, very important before we make that final move.
I also think that we live in a bit of a bubble sometimes about relationships, because we don't understand that it's kind of normal to go through these difficulties. If we're just, looking at our own relationship, we don't see the stages and the ups and downs that everyone's going through. And that's one of the benefits that we see when we do couples retreats or we do Grihastha courses. Everybody's looking at each other and go, oh, that happens to you too? Oh, you're going through that too? Oh, you went through that and you're still happily married after all this? It kind of normalizes, that all relationships do go through some difficulty. So I just wanted to, add that in. Sometimes we think it's, we're abnormal and, but most of the time we're just normal as anything, and it's just the stage. Go ahead with your question there, Tara.
So this is a private message, so you won't see it. So she asks, after 25 years of being married to a person who is not willing to believe in God and he decides to separate, how does the woman have assurance that she did her best and not have guilt to move on?
He decided to separate.
He decided, yes.
Okay. And it wasn't her choice. She obviously is one who does believe in God and stuck to it. Then I don't really see any reason for her to feel guilty, unless she thinks that there were things that she could have done better. And actually the truth is, there are things that all of us could have done better. So I don't think she should second guess herself, since it wasn't her choice, to separate. It was his choice. If he separated and he shared some things that he felt could have been different, or maybe it's some things to reflect over, but otherwise I don't see the reason to feel guilty about that. Utama might have a slightly...
Nope, exactly the same. That guilt is always hard because, we've tried, we wanted it to be a good relationship, and it's a grieving process. So I think we have to be patient with ourselves. We have to be kind to ourselves that, I did the best I could. And, Krishna has another plan for me right now. And, grieve the loss and get some good association and move forward.
Thank you for that. I have another privately messaged question that I feel like many women in ISKCON are struggling with, and men. Is it that man is always superior to a woman in a marriage, and a woman is supposed to serve the husband regardless of all?
I'll let Utama go with that one first.
To say the same thing to you. I feel that that's one of those things that we read in Shastra, and we don't really understand the social context. We don't understand the psychological context. And if it's a man reading it that wants to lord it over and use Shastra in order to not have to do personal work, just say, jump and wants his wife to say how high, he might use the sloka for his own advantage. Having said that, men are endowed usually with the psychology to want to protect. And when, so in order to, I think I discussed this we give so many seminars, I forget which one we talk about what in. But I think when you and I were doing the Sukanya thing, we talked about this a little bit, how they really do want to protect us. And so, they need to feel that they have the facility to do that. And, when we see that men want to be in a superior position, I think it's just that internally they really need to be respected. And if we see that it's respect that they want, and we need to be respectful to everyone. So I think we should offer that respect and help them to feel like they are able to do their job of looking after us by appreciating them and requesting what we need and thanking them for when they do that. So the other part of the question was, are we just supposed to serve the husband regardless of all? So that's a pretty blanket statement. And I think that that's one of those moment-to-moment decisions that we need to make. Is it something small and it really doesn't matter and it's a big deal for him and I can go either way on that? Okay, I can go for it. If it's something that's just reoccurring, that we feel we don't have any voice in the relationship, the person isn't considering us at all, then I think it's time to gently speak up. In fact, I think this needs to start at the beginning of relationships, in that we have an expectation when we go into the relationship that we are also going to be respected, that it's mutual respect. And when a person doesn't have regard for our ability at the moment, or whether it's working for us, we need to be able to say, excuse me, but I appreciate that you need that, but I also need the respect that I can't do it at this moment, and can we negotiate? And I think we have to set those boundaries from the very beginnings of our relationship, that mutual respect needs to be there, so that we're not in this situation, 10 years down the line, because that will, help set the flavor of the relationship in the beginning. Do you want to add on to that, Krishnadeen?
Yeah, I just wanted to read what Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati wrote, because I think it's always good to have this very, very deep perspective from one of our greatest acharyas. And he said,
can you just tilt your screen back down? We're just getting...
Oh, okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Okay.
The cardinal principle of Grihastha ashram is that no one may be the owner of any property or service of another. Because we all know, I'm just saying this, the owner is Krishna. Okay, I'm not going to say anything else. I'm going to read this quote. Everyone is only a servant whose activities are ever in the service of the Lord. Similarly, the sole object of everyone's service as the only master, only friend, only son, and only consort is Krishna. Marrying and giving in marriage do not give rise to any rights of a master, either to the husband or to the wife. Men and women are joined in wedlock for the purpose of serving each other in the performance of the joint service of Krishna. The wife is not an object of enjoyment of the husband, nor vice versa. They do not marry just to gratify their sexual appetites. They marry for pleasing the Lord, not for pleasing themselves. And this one is really deep, you all, to really think about. They choose for their partners only such persons who serve God better than themselves. They offer themselves to be accepted by their partners for the favor of being allowed to share in their superior service of Hari. Neither the husband nor the wife should claim the services of his or her partner on their own account. Both of them are only to offer their services if and when their partner is pleased to permit them to share their service of Hari. None of them can force their partners to serve them. This system of household discipline has its roots in the joint worship of the household deity by all members of the household. The reason why the Guru does not ordinarily ask any person to enter the state of wedlock is that it is very rare to find anyone in this world who is willing to regard his or her wife or husband as worthy of his or her unconditional services. This, however, is exactly the only relationship between husband and wife that alone can be sanctioned by the Guru. Now that's a pretty powerful statement made by a pretty powerful acharya in our movement. And we need to really think about what that means. And anybody who's wise in a marriage will know that, especially during this time, teamwork makes the dream work. You know, you have two people who are hopefully serving God together, and both of you bring talents and intelligence and skills, and you try to appreciate that and you try to work together. And the cardinal principle is service. How may I serve you as you serve Krishna? And the spouse should think, how may I serve you as you serve Krishna? How may we serve Krishna together? And when that becomes a focus, then great empowerment comes in any marriage that has that.
So if anybody would like that quote, if you go on our website and just type in Srila Bhaktisiddhanta quote, it should pop up on Vaishnava Family Resources. Tara, I think, it follows on from this. There's a next question, which I'm just going to paraphrase, how the harsh realities of emotional abuse from spouses in ISKCON. And that ISKCON as a society needs to do better overall with it. And I don't honestly believe that ISKCON has more emotional abuse than the outside world. I don't believe we have more spousal or domestic abuse. It's pretty much equal all over the world. But what is a tragedy is that we utilize our scriptures to emotionally abuse others. And that is something that is just so unethical, and it's, spiritual abuse. And that really does need to stop. And one of the ways I think that we can help to do that is to speak up. When, we find that a comment is just being used for a personal agenda and not with the real spiritual intent. And I think that's one of the reasons why we wanted to speak on some of these verses, so they're not used as a way to emotionally abuse or blame others. So that's my comment on, emotional abuse.
Yeah, and I love that point, Uttama, because, taking the scriptures to abuse people is one of the most dangerous and counterproductive things that anyone could ever do. And it reminds me of something one of our god sisters told us, that in Florida a few years ago, there was this, I don't know whether it was a sannyasi or whatever, and he was giving a class, and he was just making so many, I have to say, derogatory comments about women and children, that a lot of the women and children got up and left. And I thought,
good for them.
That's what that was. Not to sit there and hear that crazy stuff, And then, of course, I think later they protested to the temple president or something. But just, I'm not hearing this. This is not the way Prabhupada wanted the scripture to be shared. So, it's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Did you want to look for another question there, Tara? Or?
Yeah, sure. There's a really nice one here. So it says, while Sukanya's marriage seemed to be hard and far from ideal at the beginning, it seemed that she had the faith that it was part of her destiny, and that if she played the role of dedicated wife, that ultimately the outcome would be good. As the story unfolds, her fate does change as her husband becomes youthful. These stories out of Srimad Bhagavatam may sound more like fairy tales than our lives. Thus, when we face difficulties, how do we prevent ourselves from blaming others or Krishna? Can we trust that everything we face is part of Krishna's divine plan and that ultimately the outcome will be good?
Go ahead, Krishnandini.
I would say that according to our particular desires for surrender to Krishna and our particular commitments that we've made, that everything for a sincere servant who's really honestly and not being a cheater or a hypocrite, doing the very best they can to serve Krishna, to follow the instructions of Guru, then for the most part, I would say yes, that whatever happens, we can accept as Krishna's arrangement, and just have faith that we may not see all the intricacies of whatever's going on, but because we're making our best, Prabhupada said we need two things, to be serious and sincere, and then that would work. But yes, some of these Leelas or pastimes in Bhagavatam may seem like fairy tales, but also as the example I gave about Pishima, Prabhupada's sister, that was a real life story, and there have been others. And maybe all, marriages won't end up like that, but I think the part that comes very loud and clear for us is that I do my duty. What did Krishna to Arjuna? He said, fight for the sake of fighting without being attached to the results. And so Arjuna fought and he did his duty. And so the results were up to Krishna. So in that light, in that consciousness, if we act, then also similar to us, that we'll leave the results to Krishna. And what I found in marriage and life, raising children, living in the world, even though it's been, quite difficulty sometimes, then it's been a process of refinement for me. Like, what they say, when you make a diamond, you have to put it under so much pressure. And, becomes really clear that, all this pressure is going to make this really wonderful diamond. And so the challenges in our lives that we face with a Krishna conscious mood and attitude will certainly give us more spiritual strength and more insight and help us to be able to manage whatever Krishna arranges in our life. But now, as we spoke, we don't recommend anybody take abuse and say, oh, that's just Krishna's arrangement. And that's why it's good to consult with other elders and people you trust, because, you should address those issues. And commitment is a very, it's not a Kali Yuga quality, actually. People, as soon as it's not working for them, they give it up. We heard that Prabhupada, somebody said, well, I can't chant 16 rounds. And Prabhupada said, well, you made a vow. You committed. So like Prabhupada, that commitment was everything. And that's why we really recommend don't make these commitments without getting as much premarital education and understanding. But then once you make it, try your best to honor that commitment. See yourself as making a commitment to Krishna. And then ask Krishna to help you with the commitment. And then, let it work like that. So hopefully that's helpful. And I'm sure Uttama has something to share.
Part of the question was just, how to see things as Krishna's arrangement. And I think that that's something that we have to practice moment to moment. And try to not put the blame on something else or someone else when things aren't going the way we want it to. But to, stop and be reflective. And I think it goes back to your point about having strong sadhana. I know that we had a leader in our yatra many, many years ago, and he decided to give up the practice of Krishna consciousness and move somewhere. So one of the younger generation ran into him somewhere, and when you're in your early 20s, you're struggling with what to do. How much of Krishna consciousness do I accept? What do I accept? What do I not accept? How am I going to apply it in my life? And so he said to her, it's really tough. You feel guilty when you're not doing things, because there's this little voice that's saying, do it another way. But he said, you just persist and that voice will go away. And I was thinking, no, I don't want to persist and that voice goes away. So, sometimes I think we need to, like Prabhupada said, that Super Soul speaks to each and every one of us. The difference between us and a pure devotee is that the pure devotee listens and we ignore it. So I think sometimes we don't want to do the hard work, so we talk ourselves out of it, that it's not Krishna's arrangement. So go ahead, Tara. I was done.
Can I ask a follow-up question on what you guys are discussing? So you guys are speaking about the sense of desire, and obviously we're all in this material world because we desire to enjoy separately from Krishna. So if we're referring to someone with low self-esteem, then perhaps subconsciously they desire to still have that, and therefore they could attract either emotionally abusive partner, or if they're in a relationship, they kind of just reflect their own psychology onto the other person. So therefore they view that person as always being out to get them or not understanding them. So my question is just perhaps how do we know the difference between if that person's actually being abusive or if we're just projecting abusive mentality on them? And then if this latter is the case, how do we then work through our own desires to actually desire a better partner and to feel that we're actually worth that?
So I'm understanding that a big part of the question is on working on our own low self-esteem that may be present and maybe sabotaging our productive vision. We probably all have some degree of faulty self-esteem because the material world programs that into us. So self-esteem can come as low self-esteem in that how I look at myself is a reflection of how everybody else looks at me. In other words, you're the people pleaser. If someone else isn't pleased with what I'm doing, then I'm wrong. If I don't look the way society thinks I should look, then I'm bad. We have to, it's just dependent on others. So it's actually a false sense of self-esteem. It's other self-esteem. So women very often fall into that. And society does breed it into us. You got to look a certain way, you got to act a certain way. Men tend to fall into the unhealthy self-esteem that I'm good because of what I do. So they work hard, they negate their feelings about this is too much or this isn't good for me, I just got to get it done, suck it up, don't complain, doesn't matter if it hurts, don't say anything, don't cry, it's just what you do. So men tend to work hard, shut up their emotions so they don't have to feel anything, so they can work hard and be looked at nicely by everybody else. So that's unhealthy self-esteem also, that I'm good because of what I do. I'm good because of what others think of me. And the other sense of unhealthy self-esteem is that I'm good because of what I possess. And we all fall into that. Do I have the latest iPhone? Do I have the latest this and that? Am I wearing the, do I live in the right neighborhood? Do I have the right kind of house? that doesn't make us who we are. And we see that a lot nowadays in arranged marriages. I run into so many girls that they're petrified that their mother is just looking for a man who drives the right car and who has the right job, has the right possessions, and that's who they're going to marry them to, not just the personality match. So our society is kind of like fosters these false sense of self-esteem. But we have to understand that true self-esteem is that I am the eternal servant of Krishna. I am part and parcel of him, and I am good because Krishna has made me good. And we are all worthy of respect. And so really trying to understand what is healthy self-esteem is a big part of being able to function properly in this world. And we all need to look and see if we have healthy self-esteem. Otherwise, we are going to go into our relationships with unreasonable expectations that can never be fulfilled. Would you like to add to that, Krishnanandini?
No, I think that was so well stated. I don't have anything more to say.
Thank you so much for your answer. Here's a question here in response to a previous answer you gave. How should we respond when men in ISKCON make degrading comments about women and quotes Shastra to support it?
What do you want to do with them, Krishnanandini?
Krishna. You know, we're at a good moment in our history of ISKCON because I think we're at a time now when we're, you know how Uttama said we should address it, that there are women and men, thank God, who are addressing the craziness that is going on in our movement to really, I think, sabotage the beautiful offering and gift that Prabhupada gave us. So it depends, you know, like I gave the example of the women walking out of the class when this person was using the scripture in a way that was not consistent with Prabhupada's values and his mood and mission. Also to call people out, you know, now more and more that things are being revealed, you know, what's done in the dark is coming to light. And I think women being a little more confident in our birthright. We have a birthright from Prabhupada to serve Krishna and help others serve Krishna. And if we are able to do that, do it. It doesn't matter what anyone says or don't say. I mean, accept your birthright. Also, I think the thing that is going to help us a lot is being compassionate even to these crazy people. These men that are consistently wanting to put women down or put us in a box or in a category. Who knows what you know, like Bhakti Chitta Swami said, the cry for help, what they went through. Some of these people had mothers who were harsh and mean, and, you know, they don't have respect for women in period. Part of God realization is self-realization. I mean, actually, that's the first step in God realization is understanding who I am, you know. And Prabhupada, no, I just had someone, thank you. Prabhupada gave us the perfect process. And even though there's been a lot of tests for us as women, I think this is our time to shine. Because now we can accept our freedom. We can accept the gift that Prabhupada gave us. We can pray for these people. We can acknowledge, you know, and like Uttama and I, we said that we were going to do these forums to talk about some of these controversial verses that can be misused. But always the thing that comes to my mind, that if you are really serious about serving God and loving God, there's no way that you can be a person who wants to exclude any other person from that process. There's just no way that you can do that. You'll figure out, how can I include? So that's always a sign for people. And I think there are a lot more forums now for women to speak out. There are a lot more things that ladies can do. And one of the things that I found that's interesting is that this paradigm of putting women in these certain categories, we do it too as women. Some of us ladies do that to other ladies. We have a special reverence and appreciation if someone does something and they're a sannyasi or they're in a man's body. But there are other women who may be, equally qualified, and we don't offer them that same respect. So we have to look at ourselves as in these women's bodies. How do we kind of perpetuate some of the things that are going on too? How do we treat other women who are trying to serve or do that? How do we look at them? Do we, are we clear about what that actually means when we say, I am not the body? Are we clear what that means? So anyway, I probably could go on with that, but I'd love to hear what you say, Uchima.
Well, the question was how to respond when men in ISKCON make degrading comments about women. One of my good friends, she quoted me a Bible verse, said, what Peter says about Paul says more about Peter than about Paul. Mm-hmm. So I just go, okay. You're just like showing yourself up in a very bad light here, Prabhu, by making these statements. So I don't know. I think that part of it is we have to develop our sense of healthy self-esteem, and those things will be like water off a duck's back. Now, when they're everywhere, it's really harsh, and people do get hurt by them. So, I do think that we should speak up, that they're not true. But when it's, one-on-one and it's personal, it's just like, they're the one with the problem. All right, we probably spoken long enough, I would think.
Yeah.
I have one more really sincere question.
All right, let's end with the
perhaps
question.
We could take a few minutes. Okay. So the devotee asks, she says, while choosing a partner, should we choose a good balance of bhakti, financial security, professional, and love, or focus more on financial security and freedom to do bhakti? I always find it challenging when it comes to this. Also, within devotees, how do we find the right balance and interest in service and practical life living? Where do we find such wonderful devotees who would support me in bhakti, let me be happy, and make things easier for me to do more service to my family and Krishna?
Uchima, why don't you take that? Because I got a little distracted, and so if you could sort of paraphrase her question, that might help.
She's saying how to make our choices when we're going to get married. Do we look for something with financial security? Are we only looking for bhakti? Or are we looking for like a mix? And I think we're looking for a well-balanced person. And, we do want a person who's sincerely dedicated to the practice of bhakti. And just because they also have financial goals doesn't mean that they're not sincerely dedicated to the practice of bhakti. So I think we have to look at how the other person's view of balance ties in with our view of balance. And we aren't going to get a person who's just going to provide us with the ideal circumstances. There's going to be tons of money and I can serve however I like and I can go to Parikram whenever I want, and they're going to be supporting all of my, spiritual aspirations and goals. And, for that, we have to go back home, back to Godhead. In this life, we're both working at it. So we want to pick somebody who's nicely balanced in all of those. And for sure, we want to see that someone has a strong heart for bhakti, because that will help weather the storms. Because how much financial gain we have is there by the grace of the Lord. And it might be there today and it might be gone tomorrow. COVID's taken away many people's businesses, the circumstances. They can try as hard as they like, but Krishna has another plan. So I think that we've all found that the people who are very sincere about their bhakti they're able to weather the storms much better that inevitably come. So I think we're looking for a good, healthy balance, realizing that when we start in a marriage, we don't have unrealistic expectations that we're going to have everything our mother and our grandmother have. That takes time to get there. So we have to have healthy expectations. Would you like to add to that?
Yeah, just that sometimes one of the exercises we do with couples is we'll ask, these are before they get married, what are some of the qualities you think you might like in a spouse? And really go kind of deeply in your heart to kind of examine. I mean, is it important that they're truthful, that they have a sense of humor, that they are able to have a balanced view of life, that they respect elders? Just be as honest as you can and write down the qualities that you like in a spouse. And so it's a really good exercise, because later we ask, now you go by those qualities and check out which ones you have. Are you truthful? Do you have a sense of humor? And it's a very nice exercise to do for yourself, because then it makes you kind of, I think, have a more realistic view, like what you're asking of your spouse. Do you also have that? Are you bringing that to the table? You want someone to help you be in a position to serve Krishna. Are you going to be that person that helps that other person serve Krishna? You know, you want to think like that.
So I'd like to thank you all for your wonderful questions. That's really helped us to, churn the difficult topics.
Yes, very enlightening.
Thank you so much to our two wonderful speakers for firstly tolerating us and our tardiness on this session. We sincerely apologize, but yeah, thank you so much for just continuing and answering such wonderful questions, and yeah, just for your energy and your association. We appreciate you dearly, and thank you so much to everyone who's joined us here. You know, this whole session wouldn't be possible without all these wonderful Vaishnavis sincerely trying. So thank you so much.
And Tara, we have a request of our audience that if you can think of any verses in the Bhagavatam in particular that you think are somewhat controversial or difficult, and you'd like to have some discussion about that, send it to us and we'll consider, reviewing that. And Uttama, what's the best way for them to send it?
I don't know. Let's ask Tara.
Okay. Yeah,
Oh, you could do them on our Grihastha Vision Team Facebook page. You could put them there.
Yeah, put them there. That's the perfect place.
And if you get any, Tara, you can forward them on to us.
Yes.
Sure, I will do.
Very good.
So thank you all very much. Thank you, Tara, for being such a great host.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.